Hey everybody, welcome to Beyond the Cast. I'm really excited today to have my guest, Ben Chavez. We call him Chavo. He gets, or Chavez from his Young Guns. But Thanks for coming on today, brother. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Really excited to be here. Really enjoyed our friendship and glad to sit down with you and, man, just have a lot of the talks that we've had on the mountains and on the range and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah.
Well, I've met you through our church, Flatirons. You know, you're a pastor there and pretty running or overseeing the college ministry, or that's right now where you started. I know you're kind of taking on more things and you've just grown, you flourished there, but I know you, but I just want you to introduce, or I want you to introduce yourself to our guests, tell everybody like who you are and what you do currently, and then we can kind of go into your past.
Okay, cool. Yeah. My name's Ben. I'm currently a pastor at Flatirons Church here in Denver. Been in ministry full time for 12 years now, like right in the middle of senior year of college when I was playing ball, jumped in with the church and have been doing it ever since. Primarily right now work with like 18 to 30 year olds in that space, like the young adult, oversee our college ministry and jump in on some stuff that we've got in the church, like network sites and helping with men's ministry and that kind of stuff too. And the herd is another thing I'm really involved with as well.
So what's the herd? I know what it is, but so you can tell everybody.
Yeah. So the herd is through our senior pastor, Jim Bergen, our lead. He started this particular avenue to meet men exactly where they are with this adage that, hey, we're going to run into the storm together, right? We're this herd, and then we're going to have each other's backs as a shield wall. And so men's ministry, and I've had men pour into me my entire life, is a part of the DNA of why I got into ministry from the very beginning to help men become better men. It's part of the calling that I feel like I've got in my life. And so we're this group of guys who've done a couple summits. Rourke, who you had on last time, hung out with us at one of the summits, got to speak. But we just dive into the space of what is going on in men's world right now and try to navigate some of that stuff and help them become better fathers, men, husbands, any of that kind of adage. So work pretty closely with them too.
Well, we'll come back to that. Like, I love the herd. I've been seeing the modules, and like I said, we'll kind of revisit that later in the conversation. Yeah. But so you covered a lot right there as far as like playing ball and then going into ministry. But like, where did you grow up?
Yep.
And I know you've always kind of had an athletic mindset. We play golf together, and you have a little bit of a competitive edge. So we could kind of start from day one, and then maybe let us know like when you thought about maybe the first time doing ministry, or how you got saved and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can pinpoint all that stuff. So my dad is a pastor and has been my entire life. And so growing up, we were very much like military kids, man. We bounced and moved all over the place. We were down in South Texas and California. It's just kind of like the life of pastors. You kind of just go, depending on what season, to different places. So we moved a lot. But the athletic side of all that world, ministry, because I got to see behind the curtain, quote unquote, got to see a lot of the unhealth of what that looks like and how really, man, church side or the religious side really has hurt people throughout the years. Rather than it being about Jesus, it was about somebody's agenda or something. So we lived through a lot of those like aftershocks of people's decisions in the church world. That's where a lot of the moves came from. Like there was one time when I was a kid, this was my first exposure to the church hurt side. When I was a kid, I was 9 years old, and the senior pastor came into his staff of where my dad was working at that time as a worship pastor and an XP, an executive pastor. And the pastor came in and said, hey, I had a dream and I'm going to go in a different direction. I'm going to let all of my staff go. The Lord told me to. And so like he just let his whole staff go and just left all of these people in the wake of just this quote unquote spiritual decision. And so as a little kid, people always joke like with, almost any kid, are you going to be like your dad? Are you going to do what your dad did? And as a kid, I was like, hell no. Like, I don't want any part of that. But what I did see was a lot of men that poured into me directly, and especially through the world of athletics. My grandfather and I were really, really close. He passed away, but he was in the sports world. My dad was the opposite. And my dad was second chair orchestra at New Mexico State. We're really close, good friends, but there's an in common space. There wasn't any of that growing up. He was just an awesome dad, but started playing Little League really early. Just told my mom one day, like, I want to play baseball. And my parents had no idea. So much so, first season, a kid pitch, right? They bought me a women's softball bat. And I didn't even know that was a women's softball bat. So I'm like, I go out there, boom, and hit. And that coach's like, what is, like, it makes a different sound. The bing was really different. They're kind of looking at me. And that's how like far off the pace of what my parents were in the athletic side of stuff. But baseball and football were my gambit growing up. And my parents went to everything, never missed. And my grandfather was there kind of for all that stuff. So played athletics all the way through middle school and high school. Our high school team was pretty baller. We won 3 baseball state titles, 2 football, and 1 basketball. And so like I have a senior picture with like all these rings on the chain, felt pretty cool at that time. So we did all of that and then wanted to play college athletics. Ended up signing with a junior college because at that time, like in my head, I was like, oh, I'm good enough. I'm going to do the junior college route so I can get drafted earlier. So do the junior college thing and then quickly recognize in the athletic space of college, everybody's good, and it's not just, well, you're this great player from, New Mexico or from the state that we were playing, but when you get exposed to that world. So, but jumped into leadership stuff really quick. My freshman year of college, I got named the captain with all of the upperclassmen. I remember walking into my coach's office. This is ever before ministry. Just wanted to be somebody that influenced and helped others. And leadership is always something I've learned in. Love to read on it. Love to study on it. I have a master's in executive leadership, or a couple classes short of that. Now, my freshman year, he's naming. It's like 6-7 weeks into the season. He goes, "All right, we're gonna name captains for the year, Ben," and then he names these other guys. I'm a freshman. I remember walking into his office, and I go, "Coach, you've just murdered my social life." Like everybody's irritated that this freshman kid got named. And so I got thrust into that really early in that exposure to leadership and helping people navigate where they were and be motivational with them. So played college ball all the way through. It's where my wife and I met after junior college, went to a 4-year university where she was playing soccer, and we kind of bumped into each other at that time. But between
you guys attended the same college?
Yeah, the last 4 years. So junior college and then transferred to a 4-year university outside of Dallas. That's where we met. And I ended up at that university because between my sophomore and junior year, instead of play baseball, my old youth pastor grew up with a really strong faith. I like to affectionately say, like a lot of people would say, "Oh, you're a PK. You probably partied and did all this stuff." I just learned really early on from my dad and my grandfather the value of a name, and I watched how hard they work. And I didn't want to spoil that for them because of my bad behavior. So like, man, like all-American, clean cut, never got in trouble, all that kind of stuff. And so made a lot of the right decisions because I felt like I was supposed to. I just carried myself to a higher standard. But between my sophomore and junior year, I was really close all the way growing up with our youth pastor. And instead of go play summer ball, he goes, "Hey, why don't you come work for me for the summer? Intern at the church, hang out. Dude, I'll pay you and you get to hang out with me all summer." I'm like, "Dude, I'll take a summer off and do that." So that's where it all started. Okay. Worked all summer long for him. Still had no desire for ministry. I've got a sports management and kinesiology major as well. Like originally my game plan was I wanted to be an athletic trainer at a Division I university and train all the athletes. Love lifting, love exercising. That whole world of athletics was really close for me. So that was the original plan. So still on that path. And was at that time looking to transfer to ORU after junior college. And then the Lord just kind of had different plans that summer. One of the last weeks of the summer, he goes, "Hey man, I'm taking off. Would you find somebody to speak for me? Can you figure that out?" And literally, and this is zero exaggeration, out of laziness, I went, "I'll just do it. Like I'm not gonna ask anybody. Like I've led Bible studies, I've done it, so I'll do that." So I had some of my mentors that were there that night and led student ministry. And like in literally that night, in that moment, God did something through me that I don't think I was ever prepared or knew was coming. So
real quick, you hit a couple things. PK, for everybody that's listening, is a pastor's kid.
Pastor's kid, yeah.
Yeah, so that just so they could kind of catch up. Yeah. And then like for some people that may not have like faith or have a belief system, when you say that, like, I know what you're talking about, but I'm trying to like, keep this or relative for everybody. Like you're speaking and, for Christians, what do you think that means? When you say that, like God did something, like what was the feeling? What was the moment or the light bulb going on where you're like, "Oh, this is something I should look at deeper"? Yeah.
So like having grown up in the faith, I was very much exposed to, and I'm very blessed, like my parents and my parents were not religious. They had like a great relationship with Jesus, and it was not about this church or this religion or that kind of stuff, or it wasn't these rules or regulations of like, it's got to be like this or you can't do these things. And in that, you also learn to navigate when there is something in your life in faith that that you're missing or that you're not hearing. And so in this like pursuit of what I was going to do next, where I was going to go try to find to continue to play ball, which is what I wanted to do in that path, which was to go to ORU at the time. That night when I spoke, I just talked about identity to our students. And there was this moment in there that I didn't write in the message or, the sermon that I was communicating to them. I just felt like I was supposed to in that moment, just felt a leading, or like, that's what you say in the church word, a leading. And in the back of my head, I'm going, I'm supposed to say this. And so I just looked at a few students that I knew their name, and I called their name out, and I just said their first and last name and said, you are supposed to do something with your life, and just started to call some of those things out. And as soon as I was done, one of my mentors that was there, I walked to the back and he looked at me and he goes, hey, are you sure you want to do like this sports management athletic trainer thing? I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, that was always my path. He goes, that was powerful. And then he said my first and last name, and he goes, you're meant to do something. And I remember like going home and processing this out loud with my dad. And I was like, is there any merit to like me thinking about ministry? I said, Dad, because I want no part of that world. I know what it's like. I've seen how, like, for those that don't know, man, pastors get beat up all the time. I know there's like a stigma around, we're just as messed up as everybody else, but just trying to figure out the Bible and teach people about that. But we get beat up from people all the time. Comments and just, it's pretty gnarly sometimes. And
you're looked at through a magnifying glass constantly.
Constantly.
And I think there's a lot of people too that like get the misconception because you're called to lead that you're not going to make any mistakes or you're not going to be human, which is like unrealistic.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Like, and I think especially with where we're at now in the church we're at now, we very much have the freedom to communicate our flaws and things that we're walking through actively as we speak, as like we're teaching on these different things, and we don't have it perfect. But I remember that night in that moment, I was like, man, I want no part of what I've seen my dad go through for years. But I just kept praying and being honest with myself. And then when I say like, felt a calling or a leading, it was pretty clear in my gut that I think I'm going in the wrong direction. And I think I need to have another avenue to voice and to look at. And so at that particular time, ORU where I was and was supposed to go as a catcher behind the plate, and they had a kid transfer from Clemson who was All-American to go play there. And I was like, well, there goes my playing time. Like, I'm very aware I'm not as good as that guy. So I began to kind of explore and look and to play ball, and they connected me with a school outside of Dallas. And ended up going and playing there as an NAI school. It's where I met my wife. But in that path between that summer, when I got to this next school, I was like, hey, I'm going to finish my kinesiology major, but I'm going to pick up what in the Bible college world is called church ministry. So it's like you get to kind of pick the best of all of these different classes, whether it's student or counseling or preaching or whatever, and kind of go that route. And that's really what started that journey for me in those next steps. And I've had great mentors that have helped me walk through all of that. But that's where like that began for me.
All right. So, kind of picking up, like, so you're wrapping up, you're getting this different insight of like what direction you want to go in your life. So like with going into ministry and then like completely kind of changing, pivoting, right? Where what you were wanting to do versus what you feel called to do. Yeah. Like, was there any struggle with that? Were you excited about it, or like, what did that look like for you?
I think because of what I saw growing up and the hurt that came with that, it was always in the back of my mind when I said yes to going somewhere or to doing something in ministry. I was like, when is that going to happen? Because I know it happens to everybody, in some capacity. And so a lot of the struggle became, just to be quite honest, for me, like the reality of like how broken and flawed as a human being I am. But then like I was almost sitting there going, am I narcissistic to think that I can like be a pastor and to preach on these things when I've got so many things that I'm working through too? And like just being very honest of what it's like to look in the mirror and take a self-assessment of who I am and the direction that I'm going and the way that I handle situations. And so that was hard for me to get past that first thing and recognize like, no, being flawed is what gives authenticity to being a pastor and to communicating.
Right.
And if you're being willing, because I think there's a lot of churches that, in fact, in the past, I've worked for one that said, hey, we don't tell personal stories because God's word is enough and our flaws shouldn't be put out there for everybody else. And so like language like that was still weird for me. But at that time, it was just navigating what's next. Where am I supposed to go? What's that supposed to look like? I'm going into junior, senior year of college and playing ball. Where am I going to land? Where am I going to live? Navigating more of those routes. And kind of as I settled into this church ministry thing, I kind of recognized like, hey, this really is my sweet spot.
Right.
Like, cause I really do care for getting in the trenches with people and being in their stories and their journeys and trying to help them navigate like life's hard stuff. Cause life sucks sometimes,
For sure. Yeah. And I think that, you've touched on a few points, like in some of the ministry stuff that I did when I was younger, like the term is like, you get to see where the sausage is made. But again, my own expectation created opportunity for me to have like a flawed view or a judgmental view.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's across the board. People look at famous people, actors, professional athletes, and then something pops up in their life, something comes out sideways, and immediately, they throw stones, and they start throwing, rocks at glass houses per se. And I think that people, there is, like, when you call it a calling or responsibility or whatever it is, if you're in politics or you're a pastor or whatever it is, and you're leading people, I think one of the best things that you can do, and I've learned this in business, is just be transparent. So anytime, I don't want to say that I knew that I was walking into an argument, but I knew that I was going to walk into a difficult conversation. The best thing and what would always have the better outcome is just owning my faults.
Yeah.
Or just saying, or maybe it's not even a fault. It's like, hey, I'm going through a really rough time and this is what I'm struggling with mentally. And once you learn how to use that, and I think with some of the stuff that we have going on, it allows you to, not just be transparent, but it allows other people, if they're willing, to absorb what you're saying and actually look across the table and say, I'm just talking to another human being.
Yeah. And
they're going through problems.
And that's what I think a lot of people that have experienced or have seen church or feel like Christians are, or even pastors are hypocritical, is that reality of like who I see on a Sunday morning teaching or preaching in front of me is not the same person I went and golfed 9 holes with last week or 18 holes with. It's like, this is not, you're behaving differently out on the course or with these other people. I'm watching you treat other people like crap, or you're acting or behaving in your private life or with your money a certain way. So for me, it's like from day one, the best thing that I knew I could do is I'm going to be the same when you and I golf 18 holes versus if I'm up there on a Sunday morning and I'm preaching God's word, maybe minus what my son calls my golf language. Maybe I don't use that as much, but it's like, you got to be the same person. All I'm trying to be authentic to do is, hey, here's what I'm wrestling with when I'm trying to be a better person and understand and be like who Jesus asks me to be, right? Not a bunch of like, well, because the church says it's this way or because religion has carried you this way. It's like, no, this is because of who I want to become based on my personal relationship with Jesus. And if I can help other people along their journey with their stuff, like, I'm in for it. But there's a challenge because there is this microscope in a sense of like, if I'm doing it right, all my life should be exposed to everybody that I'm teaching and communicating to. Because otherwise it's just somebody putting some good words together and it's fake, if that makes sense. So yeah, experienced and started walking through that and jumped into ministry between my junior and senior of college and worked at a church for about like 8 to 10 months. And then right off the bat, man, experienced that first level of church hurt. I was starting to look for apartments, get to my senior year. And the church that I was at, was working at, and it was on Wednesday night. I was leading student ministry. For those that like don't know what that is, like 6th grade to seniors in high school. And the senior pastor's like, hey, can we meet for 5 minutes after? Just want to chat with you about something. I said, yeah, no problem. And I've been doing this for a while. I was about to graduate, was looking for places to land, looking for apartments, and went up to his office. He's like, hey, thanks for everything you're doing. We're going to go in a different direction. If you'll turn your key in, you can pick your last check up tomorrow. And if you need a letter of recommendation, man, love to write you one. Thanks. And that was literally the extent of I never have had an explanation since then. I just do know, I mean, you can read between the lines, that a son-in-law that is who took my position. And it was his daughter that was moving back to the area. So I was like, well, let it be what it is. But that was I was like, there it is. I knew it was coming, but stayed in it. I still am in it to this day, despite all that kind of stuff. But yeah, man, that's where ministry started for me, and try to walk as many paths as I can with as many people.
How did you deal with that? Obviously, like, I know you, but that had to be very frustrating.
Oh,
at
okay.
the time.
It was one of the first times that my wife and I were actually like hung out outside of school. I was like, hey, come hang out. This is my pastor. And it was that was like one of the first nights we hung out.
And you're not married yet.
We're not married yet. We're not even like officially dating yet. This is just like,
all right.
I'm like, I'm super into this girl. Hey, let me come flex my spiritual muscles. And like, you come watch me preach and hang out with all these students and do all this stuff. And we get in the car and she's like, you okay? And I just remember I was like, I think I just got fired. And I started to tear up a little bit. And she was like, it was probably the most awkward thing for her in the world. She jokes now, but that in that moment, it was really good for her to see. Cause I tend to be, like you said, like a competitive nature and pretty intense when it comes to stuff. Like, man, when my eyes are locked in on something, it's like a bulldog getting after things. And so for my wife, it was good for her to probably see that side. But I look back now and I'm like, dude, it was like one of the first times you hung out with your wife and you got fired and you were crying in your truck, So it's kind of funny, but yeah, that was one of the first times, but that's how I react in that moment. And then just try to find a landing spot. And at that time, the church that I grew up in, my old youth pastor was leaving to start a church in Jacksonville, Florida. and they had called and said, "Hey, would you come run our summer program? You know how that works." And then after that summer, they offered the job to me full time, and so I stayed and pastored in the church I grew up in.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
How long were you there?
I was there for about 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah, for there for a while, and then from there moved to West Texas and was at a church for a little over 4.5 years in West Texas in Amarillo. I'm a Texas boy at heart. I was born in Lubbock, so that felt very much like home.
Buddy Holly, right?
What's that?
Buddy Holly?
Where I was at?
Lubbock, Texas. And then where Buddy Holly. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's like everybody knows the songs of, Amarillo and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we were there for a while and then have been here in Denver for about 2+ years, almost 2 years now. Yeah.
So kind of, navigating through that, you got married relatively young, didn't you?
Yep. I was 23 and my wife was 22. Yep.
Okay.
Sure did.
And like you guys started a family right away or?
So part of our journey is this is the joke that we make. So my last name is Chavez. My wife's maiden name is Martinez, and we struggle with infertility, and we have 3 right now. So I'm 34 and my wife's 33, but it's like my family looks at me and is like, "Oh, poor Hito, only 3 by 34. You okay?" Like we joke like that side, but infertility was part of our journey. We wanted a big family right off the bat. My wife, when you kind of do the first hangouts and chats, "So how many kids do you want?" She said 8. I was like, "Well, you're marrying a pastor and I'm not going to make any money. Like, let's rethink that." And we kind of always joke about that, but we wanted kids right off the bat. And it took us about 3.5, 4 years. And we were trying from the get-go. It took us about 3.5, 4 years before we got pregnant with our son, who's now 6, soon to be 7. So got married and we're doing church and ministry together and navigating infertility, which is a really hard journey for us. And it has been we have 3 kids, but it's been a lot of highs and a lot of lows through our journey with kids and stuff like that, while navigating like ministry and leadership and trying to help people. And at that time, I was also coaching at a local high school to try to add some additional income for our family and stuff like that too. But yeah, it was a journey.
Well, kind of talking about that, if you're willing, just your more, recent child, your son.
Yeah.
That whole journey, if you would mind sharing that, because I think it's an incredible, powerful story.
Okay.
And we were together when we kind of, when you had some information about like how that was going and just to see where you're at now, it's great, but I would love for you to share.
So infertility was, again, that was a part of our journey. We did hormone, instead of doing IVF or like what a lot of people go through, we did hormone altering medications. For both of us, we joke on the one that I got on. One of the side effects was extreme weight gain. I put on 40 pounds in 10 weeks. So it was like, and for me in that, like, I love to stay pretty, fit in that. It was like, I was the most miserable individual for a while, but it worked and we got pregnant. But right after that, we got pregnant again, not too long. And then we had a late term miscarriage. My wife did, and that was in 2020 in the middle of COVID. And so that was a really scary time because my wife couldn't mourn with people the same way that everybody could. The doctor, she had to have a DNC. So originally I wasn't even supposed to be able to be in the hospital. She was going to have to go by herself. And we called a really close friends of ours. And like, basically she's like, "No, I know who to call." And I got like snuck in the back door essentially to be with my wife. So went through that. We had our daughter. And then we got pregnant this last year. Our son right now is 11 months old. He'll be 1 next month, which is crazy how fast it flies. But when we had first moved here, we found out that shortly after we moved here, we got pregnant with our little boy. And we had really great appointments all the way leading through. We had the 16-week checkup when we were going into week 20. And what we did with all of our kids is we let our oldest son go with mom on one of the anatomy scans to kind of see, his sibling, got to do that with his sister. And so everything was great. And you're kind of always nervous when you've had or experienced a miscarriage, or especially when they're late, and how kind of traumatic that has been. It was really hard on my wife, especially physically. So, but we felt great. At that time, appointments had indicated everything was really good. So I stayed home with our daughter, and my wife took our son, got to go to the appointment. And then there is some frustration in this particular aspect for me. So in that appointment, they start doing the scans and they start recognizing some things that are abnormal when it came to his brain. And so my wife's there at the time with our 5-year-old, and he's like, "Hey, I need to talk to you about a few things." And instead of like going, "Hey, why don't you and your husband come back? Here's some abnormal readings," he like told my wife everything, which at that particular time was that he was missing portions of his brain and was missing the membrane between his right and his left hemisphere. And so here's all these things, and you know how like when you're in the medical world, they have seen the worst of it and the best of it. But most of the time, depending on the doctor, you get the worst of it, and that's all that my wife heard. which was, hey, there's possibility of him not being able to walk, talk, vegetable state, need 24/7 care, feeding tube, trach, that's all that she heard. And she's in there trying to hand my son her phone to like try to keep him distracted, but he had heard the whole thing. And I'm at home not knowing any of this is going on. And I remember she called, and I just had expected everything to have gone. But have you ever like seen it or been in an experience sensing where like your phone rings or somebody calls you, or you and the moment like the moment I saw her name pull up, I knew something was not right. She hadn't even said a word yet, but by the breath that she took, I knew that it had been a bad appointment. And I initially thought we must have miscarried again, because it was around the 20-week mark, which was the same last time. That's what I thought initially. And she couldn't even muster the words. And I said, are you okay? Are you okay? And she just couldn't catch her breath. And I said, did we miscarry? And she said, no, it's worse. And so at that time, she had gotten our son in the car, and she finally made out the words of kind of what was going on, which was, oh man, I haven't like had to think through this since I preached it this last summer. And she just started experiencing all the emotions and wording what was going on. And all I heard, because that's all her mind got stuck on, was the worst of the scenarios of the case. And the first words out of the doctor's mouth were, hey, I just want to tell you, our first option is we should probably terminate the pregnancy. There are other options, but we'll let you guys process that together. And for us, and immediately in that moment, my wife said, that's not an option for us. And I'm super proud of her for that. Because regardless of what the outcome would have been like health-wise for our son, we wanted to be parents to this little boy, regardless of if it was a wheelchair or if it was 24/7 care, all this stuff. He's still our child, and he deserves to live just like everybody else and have a full life. And so, but she was just bawling, and she said, I've got to come home. I've got to come home. I said, well, do you want me to come get you? And she said, no, I'm just going to get in the car. And she shut the door of the car, and our little boy at that time, really, like, honestly, like in the Bible, it talks about having the faith like a child. And in the back, I heard him say this over the phone, and it forever was a staple point for us. And he just said, Mommy, Jesus is really good, and Jesus can heal my baby brother. But Mommy, and he said, but Mommy, even if he can't, we still have to love him. And like for both of us, man, it just welled up a lot of tears. And so he carried a lot of that for us. But from that moment on, for the next 20 weeks, we had 16 total appointments with 16 different specialists, from kidneys to lungs to everything. Because the portions that we were missing at that time, our son Bronx, his name's Bronx, but in the portions that he was missing, it was affecting the development all over his body because of the things that he was missing. And so we had to see, it was like every week we were in the room with some new specialist, some expert, somebody telling us not good news somewhere. And the best appointment that we had in that entire time was one where they said, hey, his kidneys have returned to normal size. That was the best one that we had. Everything was dark. And as like a Christian, like you hear about miracles. I've seen them as pastor. I've never experienced one, but you always are praying, and there's people that are partnering with us and praying and going, oh, it's going to happen. So every appointment you go in expecting, like, is this when we're going to hear good news? And we just never heard good news. It was just never that way. And in fact, I processed this with you. It was, I think maybe we were 4 or 5 weeks in, and you and I, you were guiding a hunt, and I was helping basically be a pack mule as best I could on that one. And I remember we were just sitting in the hotel room, and I was just like, and you were like, hey man, how's your family? What's going on? And I filled you in with everything. And man, it was really amazing to be able to have some guys carry that burden with me and not have to feel like I'm on my own with some of this stuff.
Well, you didn't just have that. You were buying a house too.
We were in the middle of buying a house. Yeah. We were renting at the time, and we didn't make an emotional decision to an extent, but because every appointment that we'd had, they had told us, hey, you're going to have to probably have a live-in nanny or somebody help you with 24/7 care. So we found a house really quick that kind of had like a mother's living quarters style per stay, or an additional room with its own bathroom, because we thought we were just going to have care all the time. So found a house. We were making this decision. We were dealing with all of the money that comes with that. And it was just a heavy, heavy season for us. And so we went through all of those appointments. And then even so much so that a couple of days before, which was our last one, they had done a brain scan. And at that time, you finally start to recognize, and you know where things are, you know what you're looking for by this point, because we've looked at it so many times. I literally looked at in that scan blank spots or dark spots on his brain. And so here we are 3-4 days out from having the baby. She was scheduled to deliver And we did it at a hospital, at a great NICU, because they thought he was going to have to go to NICU right away, all that kind of stuff. And there were still black spots on his brain. So here we go. Never got our miracle.
Well, one of the things that when we were there, but in any time that you spoke about this, like even at church, it's hard not to, feel all the things, but you were like a rock. You had emotion, obviously tears were coming out, you're just thinking about that situation. But if you wouldn't mind, like behind closed doors or in your truck, or, because when I look at you, Ben, you're a very strong human. Spiritually, and you have that, like Peter, Jesus calls him his rock, and he talks about that. But like, what were, from the good, bad, and the ugly, like, did you have any of those breakdown moments, wanted to break a wall and all that kind of stuff? Because I know that side of you a little bit too. I haven't seen it, but just, kind of just having that transparent moment, like, what were you walking through? Because you were caring a lot for your family. But
absolutely. And I think like any guy that's listening that has a family, there's a part of us that like wants to shield our family from our own emotions or what we are carrying, because they're already dealing with a lot. So my wife was going through all that. We were in a new place. We had no family here. It was a heavy season for us. And so I just hid a lot of that and just did whatever I could, as much of a support as I could, as often as I could. But there is definitely some private moments. And for me, still to this day, a lot of those moments happen while I'm working out, got the headphones in, grinding away, and you just have the flood of emotions as they kind of come out. So I had a lot of like probably moments where people are like, what's wrong with that, dude? Well, there was a lot at that time, but that was my therapy, and that's where I was working it out. And so for a lot of us as guys, we try to shield people around us, and we don't very often open up and share what we're experiencing and then let other people jump in the trenches with us. And so in that season, what I'm really blessed with, I didn't do this when we went through our miscarriage. I just kept it all. This go around, I opened up to some guys that I was close with and just had said, hey, Santino, this is what's going on. Hey, Jim. Hey, Jesse. Hey, Micah, guys that I was close with here, and just going, this is it. This is what we're experiencing, people that I worked with. And then one thing that has been really healthy for me, and I encourage anybody that's maybe even thought about or consider, is I go to a therapist. Right now it's once a month. At that time it was a lot more regular, so that I had a place to process this stuff out loud, and it didn't just destroy me from the inside. Man, I had some rough moments on runs by myself when no one is around, just like bawling and frustrated, a lot of anger at the Lord in particular seasons, and just questioning and wondering, kind of going like, hi, God, my name's Ben. I don't know if you remember me. I work for you for a living and have dedicated my life to helping people. Why are we going through what we're going through? So a lot of that was very much all of the emotions and experiences that we were carrying, plus like watching the health for my wife and how difficult that was for her, for our kids, that like our son very much was aware of what was going on and the severity, because we were getting equipment and making appointments and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, that's all went to the day of birth, and we were going in, and like right before my wife, she's strapped in, my mom, her mom, sister's in there, and a couple of doctors, and the lead nurse goes, all right, everybody can come in. And we kind of looked around, and this is when it like, for lack of a better term, shit really hit the fan in my mind. And it was every specialist that we had seen over the last 16 weeks walked in the room. And there was like, my poor wife is exposed to the whole world, and there's like 25 people in the room.
So this is for her to
give birth.
This is the delivery. Yeah.
This is the delivery. And there was, 25 plus people in the room, all these doctors, all these nurses, all ready to do whatever the first thing was. The two things that they were told us we had to watch for is, does the child breathe, or a little boy breathe on his own right away and cry? And then will he, within a certain amount of time, can he nurse? Because if he can't, then there's a very high possibility that we'll have to do feeding tubes and all that kind of stuff. And so she gets ready. Our little boy is born. They hand him off to a few people right away. They do their checks and they go, he's good. He cried right away, started breathing right away. So we felt like some alleviation there. Then this is all within the first 10 minutes. Everybody's doing their checks. Like, we haven't really got to even really hold our boy yet. Everybody's just checking because the NICU is right around the corner. Do we have to take him? Just this flood of like emotion and trying to gather all the information at once. And then within the first 10 minutes, they interrupted all the checks and said, hey, he's mouthing like he wants to nurse. Hand him to mom, and he latched right away. And in fact, is like, to this day, a better eater than any of our kids are. Like, the kid is going to be like a chef or something, loves food, man. But just like latched on mom right away, had a meal within the first 10 minutes. And then just as fast as everybody came in, the nurse is like, okay, you guys can go. And everybody left. And we were just kind of sitting there in just this little bit of a stupor of like, what's going on? Because for the first time, what we were experiencing is what our heart believed our mind was seeing, and it was trying to align the two, like believing that our son was going to be okay, and then visually experiencing it and reading it and understanding with our mind. So all this emotion, the stuff that we were carrying was the case. And then she said, hey, everything looks really good. We're going to send you to a recovery room and we'll be back in a few hours.
Incredible.
So they take us to the room and we're still sitting there like, you're wanting to believe of what you had hoped for was going on. So she comes back a few hours later. She says, well, we were supposed to take him for an MRI. Can we do a scan? Can we bring in the equipment and just do it in room? So they did right there. And they said, okay, we'll be back in a couple hours. They didn't come back for 8 hours. And so we were going, all right, they're going to see everything that they're seeing. And we just were spending our time with our little boy and just holding this little guy. My wife has a lot of Native American blood in her. And our other two kids didn't get any of that. This little boy is like, dude, he's our little Navajo kid, man. Just like long black hair, darker skin, got all that from mama. And so we're just like enjoying being with our little boy, but still in the back of our mind, pretty nervous. And all of our family leaves except for my sister-in-law. 8 hours later, the doctor comes in and she says, hey, sorry it took so long. We went through all of your paperwork. We've gone through all of your appointments and you prepared the right way. Everything that you were told was accurate today. She goes, but all I know how to tell you is according to the scan we just took, every part of his brain is present and fully formed. And we were just like, man, this flood of emotion. And she said, and then all of a sudden we become the experts and we go, hey, what about this? And what about this? And what about these things and his kidneys and his lungs and this part of his brain? And she goes, she's just so sweet. She goes, why not just go get the paperwork and we'll read it together? So she walked out and we're just staying there frozen. She comes back in, reads it, and we go all these line by line. And she goes, hey, you guys are really great. I've canceled the 8 appointments that you were supposed to have before you're supposed to leave tomorrow. And we'll do one more scan before you go, but I'm gonna let you guys have your family time. And this is when I realized like how much I had been carrying that I wasn't open about, even though I had shared with a lot of people. Is the moment she walked out, like uncontrollably, I physically like fell to my knees and just began to weep. Like my poor wife that actually went through the birth had to get down out of bed and like put her arms around me while my sister-in-law was holding the baby. And we just like wept and experienced truly for ourselves in this moment, like what we would call like the goodness of God for our family. So, and since then we're 11 months in, he's got some hearing and some eye stuff that attests to the fact that there were seasons that he didn't have what he needed to develop that we'll have to watch in future, but his health is really, really good. We don't have 24/7 care. In fact, he's just like every other little boy that he's around right now. And so we feel unbelievably blessed because of that. But it was a big, big journey and lesson that we walked through that I don't think if I wouldn't have had people, wouldn't have done some seasons of therapy, and we wouldn't have navigated stuff the way that we did, man, it probably would have broke us pretty hard. So,
well, it's a great testament to who you are and starting from the beginning with your father.
Yeah.
And just the upbringing. And I think it's important. You know, I get emotional about that, but it's such a responsibility, and privilege to like raise a child in the way that he should go.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's in scripture, but more importantly, like this world that we live in, it's tough. And like you truly experienced a miracle.
We really did. And I think like one of the things I want to peg you on is when you said like, the way that my dad had raised me, I was really blessed and have an incredible father. But what I've recognized in 12 years of full-time ministry, walking paths with so many men and women that have experienced the whole gambit of what their family was like, I can tell you this, it doesn't matter how you were brought up or who raised you, you have an opportunity to select and choose to leave a legacy for those that are after you, right? So it's like whether you were like me and had an opportunity to be raised and taught by a really amazing father, or you had an awful experience and an awful earthly father, you have a chance to pivot all of that and to lay the legacy that falls behind you. I just was blessed to get to build on what was there rather than have to tear down everything I've seen and start from scratch and build that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, like to note on that, like everything that your father had worked hard to build, you could have just threw it all away right then and went the other way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you chose not
PK
to.
adage or that joke. Like
the
joke is as a pastor's kid, most of those, like I knew a ton of them would rebel and just like, man, party and sleep around and do all that kind of stuff. Cause it was like, man, household was too strict. I don't want to be like that or whatever, and would go the opposite route. But for me, that wasn't my choice. And so regardless of people's upbringing or background, my calling in life is to help people grow as humans and as leaders and in their faith, just to become better than who they were the day before, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I say that just for everyone that's listening. I think it's important, and you hit the nail right on the head. Like, it doesn't matter where you come from, because we all come from different walks of life, but you as an individual, you as a man, and whether you're married or not, or have kids or not, like, you have the decision and you have the choice to choose what you're going to do. You can go left or you can go right.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of like how I envision, we started this podcast because we had a couple great messages that we wanted to get out that were related to, some of the hunting issues right now in Colorado, but this is so much bigger than that. What we're trying to do here is get people on. I know some incredible people like you, Ben, that have amazing stories and that have been through some really hard times.
Yeah.
And, it's to really inspire. And if there's someone that's listening to this right now and they're going through something or they're walking through something hard, what would you tell somebody like that?
Gosh, man. Like, as you're describing that, I'm thinking, like, my mind begins to think through like some of the difficult seasons that we were in, like multiple times, staring at our bank account and it's being zero and going, how are we going to make it in certain ways, looking at my family and my wife and going, and how are we going to make these scenarios? How are we going to make this situation? How am I going to fix? There's been really difficult seasons because of stuff that we've experienced as a couple, that like a couple times our marriage like was on the rocks hard, and you just go, how am I going to make this? And I think one of the things that I recognize is that every one of us has a choice to just take the next step. Like, that's what I learned through all of these seasons, because you can't fix everything in an instant or in a moment, or make the scenarios better, or fix your marriage, or make your marriage better, or you name it, get out of debt. Doesn't matter what it is. You have an opportunity to go, okay, I can't fix all this stuff, but today and in this moment, like, I can take one more step. I can take a step and choose the next right thing that's in front of me. Right. And so for us, like, part of that has been our faith is a part of that journey, right? To rely on the Lord, or to have hope that there's something greater out there than us to kind of walk through that. But at the same time, there's some aspects like, dude, I just have to pick myself up by my bootstraps, get up, go to the gym, get up, have a conversation that I don't want to with my wife. Hey, get up, find some side hustles, whatever. And like, just do the next right thing that's in front of you. Cause you can't fix everything, but that's achievable for every single person, no matter where you're at,
Yeah.
And you stack enough of those days in a row, and the next thing you know, you're looking in the rearview mirror at what once was.
Right. Well, it's interesting though, too, in your position and like some of these young individuals that you work with, some of these younger adults.
Yeah.
And how hard is it for you that when you see maybe somebody going through something very similar that you went through, and they're just being knuckleheads versus like the ones that are there? Like, I've seen and heard, this growth that you've had, like, within your ministry and what you're doing, and everyone that talks about it, just the way that you lead, you're obviously doing something right. So can you give us some insight on that?
Gosh, I very much appreciate that you're doing something right. Those are good words to hear. I think like this is where I'm at with every single person, whatever journey that they're experiencing. I cannot try to push my own, let's say like this. A lot of pastors or a lot of leaders will push their own narrative to fix somebody's situation. I think what makes a great leader is looking at a person's certain scenario, what they're experiencing, the emotions which they're carrying, and meeting them where they are and leading them what they are going through, rather than go, here's my layout, here's my framework, fit yourself to this and life will get fixed. Now, there's probably some merit to some of those things, and it probably works for some people. But like for me, God's word is true. And whatever you're going through is your reality. Because I think there's a tendency for a lot of people, when you're in a healthy season and to see somebody going through something that may be unhealthy, is to go, well, it's not that bad, or it can't be that. But it's like people's perception, Santino, is their reality.
Yeah.
So whatever they like I remember the first time that I was working in student ministry, and like this is a funny story, but we had 3 girls, their boyfriends all went on a coup together and like dumped their girlfriends all in the same day. All the girls ended up at our house hanging out with my wife, just bawling and crying. In my head, and like the part of the back of my mind, my wife is being so sweet to them. But I'm like, in a couple weeks, you're going to be okay. You'll probably find some, like that's how my head was thinking. And I remember recognizing in that situation for the first time, but even though that's how I felt, their perception meant that their world and their reality was crumbling around them. And so not to take people's scenarios as less than, or a scenario that somebody may be experiencing, whatever the gambit is, and recognize that that is their reality. How do I help them in the midst of their reality, or shift the framework so their perception of what they're seeing can be a little bit different, without like telling them that there's no merit to what they're experiencing. And so for us, like the model is whatever somebody's going through, we want to jump in right where they're at and help them navigate it where they are at and what they are experiencing, rather than try to make it be something that I think it should be. You know?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the culture, we're very fortunate to, attend a church like Flatirons, because of the approach on how they, take on their, take on their congregation.
Yeah.
Everyone that attends, everyone's in a different place. What's the attendance of the church, or like, do you know where we're at numbers wise?
Like right now, like physical attendance on the weekends, we're like right around like 12,000. And if you include like all the campuses online, it's quite a bit higher than that.
And then obviously online adds to it. So when you think about that, even if, like, let's just keep numbers simple, even if it was just 10,000 people, to even try to get 10% of those people to, try to understand, like, you've walked into a safe place.
Yeah.
That would be an incredible achievement. And because of aligning with the right type of individuals, having people like you on staff, I would venture to say that number is probably closer to 90%, which is unbelievable. I think there's, you get the people that show up because they hear about it, they get invited or whatever it is, but it's incredible to see that, this village that has been built, and I'm just using it as a metaphor. It's not really a village. It's an incredible, we have walls, we have nice, lights, and we have great worship, but it's amazing that the focus of leadership and the intentionality it puts into people, where that church is, where it's been and where it's growing to right now.
Yeah. I mean, our goal is like, we try to say, and one of the things I've been sharing is, hey, we want to be able for people to know that we're going to share our mess and our miracles at the same time. So like in the middle of like what you may be going through, it can be both. Like you can be in the middle of a mess and life can still be really good. Your marriage can be on the rocks and on the edge of divorce, and you can find moments that will be sweet in the middle of those things. It can be both and so we try to say like, hey, as a church, we're going to do anything short of sin to help people like take their next step of whatever that thing looks like, whatever they can navigate, however we can be helpful. Like we're in for that for people. Right? And we want to say like, one of the things we joke about is I've watched so many pastors throughout the years, like try to be somebody else's, like what the term would be like Holy Spirit, or like their own conscience. And man, I'm a crap Holy Spirit, and I'm a crap conscience for somebody else. But what I can do is I can go like, hey, here's what Jesus has taught me. Here's what his word says. And then let you bump into Jesus and wrestle with your faith on your own. And when you're ready for me to hop in the trenches with you, dude, I'll freaking be there, and I'll walk through whatever I can, however I can be faithful with respect to my family, who's my first ministry, my first calling, over all of that kind of stuff. But those are kind of some of the things we navigate. We say we try to be raw and real. And man, you've probably, anybody that has a chance to watch online or attend, you hear that very much that narrative in a lot of our stuff, including the way that we lead and navigate our own personal life leadership and self-assessment stuff, to the way that we lead our families, the way that we try to help people in their own forms of leadership and their own lives that they carry too.
Yeah. Well, I think with, even with the things that we're doing with this podcast, man, it's interesting because I know a lot of guys like in the hunt world, a lot of guys in the fight world, like Dwayne Ludwig was on here and he attends Flatiron. So it's real interesting though, that like, as we're all getting older, I'm just seeing, I look at guys like Jordan Peterson, where he's really pronounced his faith, and he's proud of it. And then you got like Andy Huberman, who recently has said that he believes in it. It's interesting, if it's maturity or whatever, that there is just something out there, for people that they can grab onto. And like you said it earlier, like even if you had a bad earthly father, that there's a spiritual father that can, come alongside of you. And if you plug in, it's not necessarily that they're going to go find Ben Chavez and he's going to lead them. Is that he's going to, you just said it, you're going to jump right in the trenches and be right there with them and not be their Holy Spirit or, not be their judge, just come alongside of them and point them to, what's true and change your life.
Yeah. Cause it very much like, just to be quite honest, I'm not real fond of religion or of the quote unquote like church that comes with that.
Nor am I.
And I think we had walked through certain seasons of our life where we had seen that. And when we had an opportunity to come on staff to Flatirons, we were already carrying the DNA in which this place is. And we didn't realize we needed this place as bad as we did. So we've walked through these walls to recognize like, hey, we are about, this is as, I don't know, goofy as it sounds, man, I'm about my relationship with Jesus and about his people and being in the mess with his people. Like that's what I feel like Scripture intended from the very beginning, was not to just build these walls and make certain things. And it's all about this theology and it's about this stance, or it's like, no, we're not going to die on a hill for all these. We're going to die on the hill for his people, and we're going to walk and navigate, because life is too hard to do it on your own. And life is too hard not to have some type of a faith. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
For sure. Yeah. Well, I said I wanted to come back to it. So with the herd, that's, obviously it's focusing on the hearts of men.
Yep.
And right now, can you tell everybody like what's happening at the beginning of the year, like with the Herd 90 challenge, so they can kind of get up to date, and then your role in some of the things that you're helping or involved in?
Yeah. So about 2 years ago, Jim Bergen, our senior pastor, cast an initiative called the Herd, which was a branch of making men's ministry, or what the church would consider like ministry, directly to help men, something deeper and something more like raw and realistic that doesn't feel like a Bible study. Some of those things happen in groups, but it's like, hey, how do we navigate our leadership? How do we navigate our emotions? How do we navigate in a very like real context, rather than going, well, Scripture says these 5 things, and like wrestling with that stuff together. So that started about 2 years ago. We've had what we would call 2 summits. They happen at the end of August of every year. And it's like 450 to 500 men go up in the mountains together and just wrestle with what's going on in their world. How do I become better? How do I ditch some of the struggles in which I'm experiencing? And how do I actually work towards who I want to become, rather than recognize, like, because I think part of us sometimes is we look in the mirror and we recognize we're not who we thought we were, or we're so much shorter than the vision which we had for ourselves. So how do we break that gap? And so we try to do a bunch of different things. One of the things we do through a branch of that called Herd Strong is men jump in on groups every other week through Zoom together, of like 8 to 12 guys that like wrestle with a lot of heavy topics or things that they've encountered, whether it's like, leadership issues or anger or pride or whatever, like you name it, sexual integrity stuff. Like we jump in the weeds quick with all of that. And we do some of those things. Another thing we did, which you mentioned, is at the beginning of the year, we do a thing called Herd 90, which is like an amped up version of like Hard 75. And we do this for 90 days together, and which includes like working out twice a day, one of those being outdoors, your gallon of water, form of journaling, read an additional passage through the Gospels together, and like several other little adages as you kind of go. And I'll say, like, doing it right now with 3 kids is like, dude, I've done some rucks with some kids on my back, and just like up at 5 right now. Our kids aren't great sleepers anyway, so they're already up at 5. So like getting my workouts down in the basement and doing some of those things. It's like, how do we stretch ourselves a little bit more to jump in with it? And I've seen some incredible journey and shifts like for some men in right now.
Are you doing it, or have you been on it?
Yep. So
I was going to ask you, so in Colorado, we don't live far away, but we got hit with like 4 days where it didn't get above single digits.
Oh yeah.
How was that for you?
Extra jackets, man. Like you told me one time we were on a hunt and you're like, hey man, there's no such thing as bad weather. It's just bad gear.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm like our neighborhood probably laughs at me. I put on some pretty good hunting gear and like have just rucked through the neighborhoods and done some of that kind of stuff, like depending on the season or the time. And there's been like some cold days where it's like all you can see is my eyeballs, and doing some of those outdoor workouts. But it's been tough. It's good for me. There's been multiple times in my life I'd carry myself right around like 10% body fat, and like haven't been a dad and still working out, but not doing any cardio. I went in on January 2nd, got all that tested, and I was like a little over 25%. And I looked at myself and you just like, oh, you fat piece of, like you just start saying that stuff. So I was like, all right, I got to shift this. It's time to like kick it into gear for real. I know how to do all this stuff. And so did that about a month in, down like depending on the day, like 12, 13 pounds on average already off the bat. So just cranking it and trying to be like a good example for my kids. My kids work out with me. They like want to do stuff. So it's just kind of fun, man.
Well, I was going to see like through or ask you about like, I recently went through some of the modules. So part of Herd 90, you log in, it's a membership thing, and then you get
navigate through some e-courses and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I jumped in on that because I'm more doing the 75 because Cassandra and I already had a trip planned to Napa.
Yeah.
So I was
I think,
It's like,
one of the things is like no alcohol. You're not drinking either. So I've been dry for the last 4 weeks, and I've had a couple like rough days, and I get home and you're like looking at that bottle of bourbon, like, man, looks really nice right now. But
well, if you need something to scratch, there's a Blue Moon non-alcoholic.
Yeah.
I've tried a lot of them because I just enjoy beer. I like the way it tastes. Yeah. And the non-alcoholic Blue Moon is money.
Is it? Okay,
yep. I'll be drinking that for Super Bowl weekend.
I'm going to have to try it. Yeah. Cause there's like some days you're just like, man, this Diet Coke just isn't hitting it. So you got to follow a diet too. I'm doing no sugar as part of that while hitting my macros, but yeah. So you're talking about some of the modules that you.
Well, yeah. So kind of, going into that, like it's amazing to see like, with where Jim and you guys have started with, you start with Matthew and then you read through the Gospels and all that kind of stuff. And my life just feels like I work out, I work out, and then like we're in bed by like 9:00 now or 10, because there's not like a social component, but like my social components have been like the modules and reading some of that kind of stuff. But I really like the intentionality and like the challenge that you guys put there. I think it's because you're signing up for it, you're volunteering to do it, right? And then you're obviously paying for it. It's one of those things that I think men need to be challenged harder. And it's an opportunity where you can do that versus, on the weekend, there's still some sort of, I don't know, some blanket of like safety or whatever you can put on there. The gloves actually come off in these. So I would just encourage guys to do it. And do you guys have any bigger plans for this coming year? I've heard of a few things, but like, for people who expect, or men that are listening to this that might want to jump into that. I know there's a summit at the end of the summer, but is there anything else that's happening with that?
Yeah. So we did that. This last year, held a conference and we actually held it at Flatirons, had some guys come in. Joshua Broom's one of the names that came in, and just it was on men's integrity and different types of issues. So we've done that. We're going to repeat something similar in some capacity in partnership with the church. A couple different for those that are in Herd Strong, which is like the level up in what you're doing. Some micro, what we call like micro retreats over a weekend to dive into some stuff together, to get in some mess. Cause I think you're 100% right. Like for us, it's like, what challenge can we put in front of men? Because what's innate in our nature as a man is like, we actually to an extent enjoy challenge. Like we enjoy trying to better ourselves in some way. And for those of you that said, no, that's not really for me, I would just like to challenge you and say, how long have you sat on the couch and not experienced challenge? Just finished this really great book called Coddling of the American Mind. If you're a reader, it's an awesome one to check out. But just talk about how in culture and society today, everything has shifted to where everything is convenient and easy for us, and how really we've become soft as a generation and in our world today, because we haven't experienced hard things, and we don't have to. We can navigate or go in a separate way and then really find whatever we want to fix our own, or to amplify our own thinking rather than be challenged on what we're going through. So for us, what challenge can we give men? What can we navigate that? How can we help them become better than who they were yesterday in their leadership as husbands, in the workspace, all that kind of stuff. So whatever we can do to navigate those particular routes. And so for us, our calendar year is like summit end of August to summit the following year. So right out of the bat, out of August, we'll launch groups again and we'll jump in. And what's cool is you don't have to be a local or in the Denver area. We've got guys from all over the country, guys down in Florida and New York and Alaska and all over the place. And you jump in on a Zoom every other week, but then come and attend some stuff physically in person throughout the year, which is really great.
Yeah. Well, and that's just like one outlet, but I think also kind of, not that you need to give like a message on this, but I'm completely open to it. But I just feel that there's, like I have two sons, and my youngest son right now, he's just, he just pushes hard, which against like some of the things that I want him to do. But part of that's just natural because he's a teenager, right? And even though I feel that we have done a really good job raising him, my oldest son kind of went through his season, and but to see where he's flourished and he's come through, I think there's a natural part of just being a guy that, you want to be out on your own. You want to prove something. And I think there's a healthy part of that.
Yeah.
But there's also, I see guys that haven't laid that down and they're still carrying that mentality, and, 10, 15, 20 years later, and they don't get any of this work. They don't know how to be vulnerable. They don't know how to do that. And it's something that, even though my sons are young, I'm constantly trying to put that in front of them. Like, you have to be in a group, like you got to find
some men around you.
Yeah. You got to have your round table of people that can challenge you, and do that. And again, like, it's just something that I believe, and whoever's listening, I don't want you to feel like I'm talking at you, but I am, because I lived in those shadows where it's like, no, I got this. No, I got this. I don't want you to see what I'm going through. And because I have a leadership in the space that I'm in, I've always just been in a leadership position. And with that comes a lot of loneliness, and with that you can get in a lot of trouble. And I've experienced all that. So what would you say to men that are in that spot?
Here's the truth. No matter who you are, no matter what your role is, your job, whatever, in life, you're going to experience really hard things. When you keep it on your own, eventually that pressure begins to build. And at some point in your life, that's going to come out sideways on somebody or on yourself. I don't care who you are. Life's too tough and you're going to bottle it up and it's going to come out sideways on somebody, and you're more than likely going to regret that thing. So for like me, I actually use this analogy when I talked on the last summit. This is who I am in a nutshell. I'll go to like Lowe's or Home Depot if I'm doing a project, have a bunch of plywood, the wind's blowing outside, and I'm like picking up the plywood and it's like yanking me around the parking lot. And I'm like, I'm going to grunt this in. I'm a strong dude. I'm going to load it myself. And I could hear somebody 10, 15 feet away and go, hey man, you need a hand with that. And for whatever reason, it's easier for me to say, no, I got it, than yeah, I need help. Like and we just do that as men. Like there's a part of us that goes, no, I got it. I'll fix it. I'll try to figure out a way to fix my sexual issues, my pornography stuff. I'll try to fix my marriage. I'm not a good dad. I'll do this. I'll quit alcohol. Like we just put all of that on our own shoulders. So for me, that's like what I'll do in life is I'll just go, I got it. Rather than just going, hey, yeah, I could use some help. And then letting somebody help in whatever season that looks like, and having some guys that have your back and have some men that you can look at and go, hey, this is a hard season for me. And they go, hey, I got you. Right. And so developing some of those relationships is not a natural tendency, but to be 100% honest is pivotal for you being successful as a man and as a human being. And especially when it comes to faith and it comes to anything that has to do with the current life and leadership in which you're living. And so for me, I've just found some of those men in this season that have done that. You know, the Micahs and Hughes and Jims and some of the guys that are on our board, Adam and Charlie and Stacen and Josh, these guys that I've become close with that I can share stuff with and go, hey, I'm in a shit season right now. Like it feels heavy and it feels hard, and watch guys jumping in the trenches a boost of morale, man. Like it feels different, right? You remember like as a kid, like I'm experiencing this with my 6-year-old, when the light is off, man, I don't care how brave my kid thinks he is. When the light's off and he's in a room dark by himself, there's a different level of bravery that happens. You feel the terror that's around him. So he like goes in a dark room and I feel that. But if I walk in there with him, or his sister walks in there with him, or somebody does, the moment you walk into a dark space with somebody else, there's a different level of confidence that you step into a dark situation because you know there is somebody with you to fight whatever that battle looks like. But it's not our natural tendency. It's easier for us just to say no than it is to go, all right, yeah, I could use some help, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah.
And love hearing your story and, just watching your journey. On social media, what's your handle?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's all the way back in the day. So I got in early. It's just Ben Chavez. That's it, man. See, yeah.
So you got a good one.
Yeah, pops up as Chavo, because in high school, when Friday Night Lights was coming out, I was a strong safety in high school and a running back. And so, dude, Chavo, Friday Night Lights, man. So it just stuck. So it'll be one of those two things.
Yeah, I'm a little bit older where Chavez from Young Guns.
Yeah, baby.
Lou Diamond Phillips,
yeah.
baby. But I would encourage anyone that's listening, you have like on Flatirons, there's messages that you've taught. People can look it up. And then obviously with social and the things that you do through Flatirons.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
If you're in the area local, I would recommend, if you have kids or, some young adults that, are trying to figure it out, when is shift?
So we have shift program that meets Friday nights, and that's like one of the forms, like what you're describing, is we help people jump in on their 12-step journey or stuff that they're dealing with. I lead directly what's called District, that meets on Tuesday nights at 6:30. I'm
so sorry. I get the names mixed up. So District. Okay.
Yep. District is directly what I lead. That happens on Tuesday nights.
Okay.
Doors open at 6:30, 9:30. It's like 18 to 25-year-olds coming, hanging out in the space. We have like 150 college students or so that are hanging out every single week together, wrestling with their faith journeys as they're owning that for themselves. So if you got somebody in that space, I'd love to have them come hang out. And of course, we have all of our weekend services too that you can jump in on.
And it's not just for college; it's anyone in that age range too, right?
Yeah,
that can come
we
and
just
check
say
it
for
out.
college age, so 18 to 25 is that Tuesday night, and we also have a young adults program that meets at our Denver campus on Thursday nights. That's like 25 plus.
Cool, man. Yep. Well, thanks again for being transparent, vulnerable, and sharing your story. It means a ton.
Yeah.
I love you, brother, and we'll have to get out and play some G's. Things start warming up.
Snow on the ground, right?
Yeah,
all right,
for
man,
sure.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah. All right.